Makers report higher sales in mid-August. A Drexel assistant trader gets 15 months and closing arguments in the Leona Helmsley trial. From the producers of the Financial News Network, this is This Morning's Business. Good morning. I'm Doug Ramsey in New York. It's Thursday, August 24th. Our top story this morning, Detroit is having little trouble reducing car inventories in advance of the start of the 1990 model year. The big three U.S. automakers all report higher sales in mid-August, but as Greg Palcott reports, luxury car makers like Cadillac and Lincoln are bracing for some new competition from the Japanese.
Car sales sizzled in the late summer heat. Price incentives and fear of higher 1990 prices had customers buying in mid-August. While GM was just up slightly, Ford was up almost 3%, and Chrysler models showed a 6% gain. There's another car doing well, and it's not even officially out yet. It's Lexus, Toyota's entry into the luxury car field. And its first New York dealership opened Wednesday, deep in the heart of blue-collar Brooklyn. The Bay Ridge Lexus opening had everything: pastries, champagne, and straight from Japan, Toyota family member and Lexus senior coordinator Tetsuro Toyota. The center of attention, of course, the car. The reviews, millionaire developer Peter Calico liked it.
I think the surface details are absolutely first rate.
Jeff from Brooklyn loved it.
It's like a piece of art. It really is. It's gorgeous.
And George Bobolis bought it.
You know, it's very comfortable, has a lot of good features which Cadillac doesn't have.
And that's the best review Toyota could hope for. It was thought the Lexus $35,000 plus price tag meant the car would be aimed at BMW and Mercedes owners. But with a second cheaper Lexus model and domestic luxury car prices going up, analysts and Lexus now say Detroit is a target.
Originally, we thought about 10% of our sales would be conquest from Cadillac and Lincoln, but it appears that our estimates were low.
The stiffest competition for Japan's Lexus, out September 1st, might come from Japan itself. Nissan is set to introduce its luxury Infiniti in November. Honda's Acura is already a big seller, and Mazda's also reportedly interested. All this amounting to another Japanese offensive on another segment of the world car market. Greg Palcott, Financial News Network, New York.
A bit player in the insider trading scandal that rocked Drexel, Burnham, Lambert, and destroyed Princeton Newport Securities has been sentenced to a 15-month jail term. Lisa Jones, a former Drexel trading assistant convicted in March of perjury and obstruction of justice, will serve most of the term in a minimum security facility. She'll also have to pay a $25,000 fine. In deciding on a 15-month sentence, the judge said under U.S. law he could have imposed a 24-month term. You can socialize with him, but you can't do business with him. That's the gist of a memo Drexel is circulating to all its employees, warning them to avoid all direct or indirect business contact with former Drexel junk bond chief Michael Milken or his brother Lowell. A spokesman for Drexel says the memo is a follow-up to Drexel's settlement with the Securities and Exchange Commission in June and is not meant to ostracize the Milkens, just clarify the situation for the Wall Street firm's employees. Hotel queen Leona Helmsley's fate will soon be in the hands of a jury following closing arguments that began Wednesday with a lengthy summation of the government's tax evasion case against Helmsley. Alan Chernoff reports.
Self-described hotel queen Leona Helmsley is about to learn whether she'll have to do time in jail. After 7 weeks of testimony, prosecutor Kathy Seibel summed up allegations that Mrs. Helmsley evaded taxes by having Helmsley companies pay her personal expenses. They ranged from a $45,000 clock in the shape of the Helmsley building to milk and eggs. Seibel asked, why would one of the wealthiest women in the world cheat on her taxes? The prosecutor said, just because you're rich doesn't mean you're not cheap. The prosecutor also reminded the jury of Leona's now famous quote, we don't pay taxes, only the little people do. Seibel said the remark is evidence of Mrs. Helmsley's selfishness, greed, and sheer arrogance. But the prosecutor cautioned the jury not to convict Mrs. Helmsley because you hate her.
Confident right now?
I'm not allowed to answer. Sorry.
In his closing argument, attorney Gerald Pfeffer conceded Helmsley's aides did falsify invoices, but not to deceive the IRS, rather to pay contractors without letting Mrs. Helmsley know they were being paid. Mrs. Helmsley, Pfeffer said, believed contractors were ripping her off. As her lawyer described how contractors cheated her, Leona Helmsley slowly nodded her head and cried silently. Closing arguments will continue on Thursday, and on Friday, the jury should be deliberating on Leona Helmsley's fate.
If convicted, she could face up to 20 years in prison. Alan Chernoff, Financial News Network, New York.
Per capita annual incomes rebounded in the Southwest, but incomes in the Northeast posted the biggest increase. Those conclusions, part of the Commerce Department's new report on per capita income in 1988, which was up 6.6% nationwide. Incomes were up 8.4% in the Northeast to over $20,000, easily the highest in the nation. The Southwest remains the poorest region, just over $15,000 in per capita income, but that was up over 5% compared to a 3% increase in 1987. A coalition of black and Hispanic consumer groups is taking aim at makers of malt liquor and the way they market to minorities. Bob Cardin reports from Washington.
Power, romance, success. The message seems clear. Drink malt liquor and they will all be yours. But a coalition of minority and health groups are protesting these ads, saying they are sending a dangerous message by promoting this high-alcohol beer to minorities.
The beer industry is using the sleaziest advertising to market high-alcohol products to the people who suffer the highest rates of alcohol problems.
Malt liquor represents a small but visible segment of the beer market. It accounted for just 2 to 3% of the 191 million barrels of beer sold last year. The best-selling malt liquors, Colt 45 and Schlitz, spend about $5 million a year on advertising. Most of those ads are aimed at minorities, the largest consumers of malt liquor. Advertising interests say the ads are in good taste, and besides, target marketing is just good business.
That's the efficiency today in marketing, is being able to segment the market and then be able to target that market so that you are spending your communications dollars to reach that segment of the audience that is going to be a user of the product.
But the health groups want beer advertisers to stop target marketing minorities and have sent letters to government officials asking that the most suggestive malt liquor ads be taken off the air.
Like the rest of the domestic beer market, malt liquor sales have been hurt in recent years by imports. But analysts say sales are starting to pick up, so the industry can't be expected to abandon what it considers a successful advertising strategy. Bob Cardin, Financial News Network, Washington.
And still ahead on this morning's business, Smart Money. Our week-long series on financial heavyweights continues with a profile of author, columnist, and financial software designer Andrew Tobias. Plus, publisher Malcolm Forbes moves to spike criticism that he was trying to fob off some of the costs of his lavish 70th birthday party on the U.S. taxpayer.
This morning's business is brought to you in part by U.S. Sprint, America's first and only nationwide 100% digital fiber optic phone company.
It looked like another nothing day for the stock market till buyers took over with a rush the last hour and a half yesterday. Dow Industrials rising 27 points to close at 2678.11. The broader S&P 500 index tacked on 3.5 points. Volume on the New York Stock Exchange up some from the first part of the week, but still a moderate 160.4 million shares. The average stock on the big board gained just under 1%. Blue chips doing better than the secondaries. Amex shares up 0.5% on average. OTC stocks up 0.7. Stratus Computer added $3 trading over the counter. Rumors IBM was interested in a buyout. IBM doesn't comment on such talk. Stratus says it knows of no such offer. Watch Eastman Kodak today. Kodak gained $1 and change on talk the company would make its restructuring plans public yesterday, and that's what Kodak did after the market closed. The company announcing plans to chop 4,500 jobs and also some divisions. There has been speculation in the market of a similar type of announcement from Digital Equipment Corporation, and the stock yesterday went the other way. Digital losing almost $0.50 on that report that it plans to cut as many as 7,000 workers over the next 2 years. That type of announcement the market usually likes to hear. Who can figure? Bonds finally had a good day, up 11 points on the Shearson Long-Term Treasury Index, dropping the yield to 8.38%. And little change for the commodities basket, up 0.1% as measured by the CRB Index. Now for an outlook on today's market, Louis Ehrenkrantz of Rich & Company joins us. Lou, welcome again.
Good morning.
You, I know, think that some of the big-time investors out there are starting to worry much more about inflation than recession. What's telling you that?
Well, you can see the way the money is being utilized that's coming into the market. All during the weakness last week in the market, I noticed that the retail stocks kept making new highs, very strange, and then the natural gas stocks started moving up.
And yesterday more of the same?
Yesterday the natural gas stocks moved ahead. They boomed ahead, a point or two, per issue, and the retail stocks again hit new highs.
And what do these two groups have in common?
They have one thing in common. They are not only beneficiaries of inflation, they can cope with inflation easily by rising prices, and that's why I think that the key to the investing acumen here is that the big money has bought inflation, not recession. Now, I don't know if they're right or wrong, but the market looks ahead 6 months. That's telling you we're in for inflation within 6 months.
If that is the case, then what might we think will not do very well in that sort of scenario? What are they not buying then?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult to raise prices of automobiles further or any kind of large ticket item. You must buy a suit. You must buy a medicine. You have to have energy in your home. You don't have to have a lot of the big ticket items like appliances, washing machines, so that could suffer.
Lou Ehrenkrantz, thanks very much. See you next week. And coming up, the former GE executive taking over at Wang Labs. But first, in our Smart Money today, if you're thinking of buying a home, 8.71% is the average rate for a 30-year adjustable mortgage tied to the 1-year Treasury Index. In our business focus this morning, financial author and columnist Andrew Tobias. As our series Smart Money continues, Prue Sowers profiles the guru of personal finance who's made a fortune of his own with a best-selling computer program that helps you manage your money.
Andy Tobias didn't plan on becoming a financial guru, but when his book, with the eye-catching title, The Only Financial Investment Guide You'll Ever Need, took off, so did his career.
All I knew was kind of basic common sense sorts of things.
Buy low, sell high.
Which is still all I know. But that's the stuff, that's the advice that's good advice.
Tobias is now one of the best-known personal finance writers with magazine columns, more books, and he's also jumped into the lucrative computer software field. He says his investment advice follows a four-pronged approach. First, have some liquid assets, a savings account or a money market fund. Second, an inflation hedge, something that will rise in value as inflation rises. For most people, that's their house. Third, a deflation hedge, like fixed-rate securities. And last, what Tobias calls a prosperity hedge, the stock market. Do you follow your own formula?
Pretty much. I have some bonds and some real estate and some stocks and not too much in the way of liquid money, but I have a credit line, and not at 19.8%.
Now, a funny thing happened to Andy Tobias on the way to the bank. He routinely invests in theater productions simply because he likes the theater. He never expects to get his money back. But that all changed with this production, and it turned out to be one of his better investments. Nonsense began as a relatively small $150,000 musical comedy. Tobias fell in love with the play and put up a hefty chunk of the budget in return for a sizable piece of the profits.
It's now playing in, I think, 30 cities around the world on 4 continents. And it's every time I get one of these checks, it's so embarrassing. I mean, that this would be my best investment, musical comedy about 4 dead nuns.
The 4 dead nuns are one reason Tobias calls his own portfolio wildly diversified. But real estate is one of his favorites. He owns property in his hometown of Miami, a lot of it.
About 7 years ago now, Time magazine had a cover story saying that Miami was over. There was it wasn't a cycle. It was going to be, just go down and down and down until it suddenly became, a third world country, and it was hopeless. Well, that's probably the time to buy real estate in Miami.
Tobias admits Miami isn't rebounding as quickly as he had hoped, but he says he's patient because he's so diversified.
The reason I have the patience is I have so many of them by now. I mean, little bits of so many different things, that something's always happening. There's always something to be interested in or angry about or whatever.
And responsible for. Tobias doesn't believe in money managers, preferring to make his own decisions his own way. Prue Sowers, This Morning's Business, New York.
In People Watch today, Malcolm Forbes fights back and Wang Labs recruits a new president. Richard Miller has a reputation for turning around businesses in trouble, and he's signed up for the challenge of a lifetime. The former GE and RCA executive is taking over as president and chief operating officer at Wang Laboratories, the ailing mini-computer maker based in Lowell, Massachusetts. Miller will occupy the office recently vacated by Fred Wang, son of founder An Wang, who continues as chairman and chief executive. But Wang himself says Miller will assume, quote, the total control of the operation at Wang, and major shareholders are pushing the founder, who is recovering from a cancer operation, to relinquish the CEO title altogether and make it official. And Malcolm Forbes says no, he won't write off any of the cost of his 70th birthday bash on his taxes. The party at Forbes Palace in Tangier, Morocco last weekend cost roughly $2 million, with the publisher flying more than 600 friends, including Elizabeth Taylor, in for the festivities. But no sooner had the belly dancers stopped gyrating than a California Congressman, Pete Stark, was asking the IRS to make sure Forbes doesn't claim tax deductions for the party, thereby making the U.S. taxpayer foot part of the bill. At a hastily called press conference Wednesday, Forbes said some deductions are justified, but he never planned to take them anyway.
It was never intended to be, and not a penny of it is. But it certainly, a case could be made when 75% of your guests are your biggest customers. But we're not making that case.
EF Hutton was once one of the largest and most aggressive firms on Wall Street, but no longer. And in a book out this summer called Sudden Death, The Rise and Fall of EF Hutton, author Mark Stevens tracks the decline and eventual merger of Hutton into Shearson Lehman Hutton. And Stevens joins us to talk about it. Mark, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
What went wrong at Hutton?
Well, it was a combination of two things. You had sort of management neglect, and you had incompetent management. If you just capsulize the story, you had CEO Robert Foman, who took over the firm in 1970, started off as a magnificent CEO, was decisive, contrarian, built up the firm's retail network when others were shrinking. And then kind of, you know, the old expression that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, he kind of got too used to being the boss and the CEO and wielding power and doing whatever he wanted to do.
But weren't there any checks and balances at EF Hutton?
Not really, because what you had was what you find from time to time in major corporations, and that he surrounded himself with cronies. And the board was really just a rubber stamp. And there you really have a perfect case of what happens when you don't have an independent, alter ego type of board trying to control and corral a CEO who gets out of hand.
Is this easier or more likely to happen on Wall Street than in other industries, or does it happen everywhere?
Oh, I think it can happen anywhere. I mean, I don't think, one problem with Wall Street, I think, is that it tends to be cyclical, not only with the market, but with the way it ran its business. It probably still is that way. When things are going good and commissions are high, everyone says everything is fine. When the market nosedives, you've got to get some management controls in here. You've got to get things more sophisticated. As soon as the market booms again, everybody throws it out and goes back to the old way. And that kind of happened in Hutton very much, too.
In talking to the people you talked to for the book, did you get a sense of a great deal of bitterness on the part of Hutton employees who feel that they were misled or led astray?
Oh, well, yeah, you know, because Hutton was a great place to work. They called it Camelot. They're in the 70s and the early part of the 80s. The people who worked there had been there for many years. They loved working there. It was an elite firm. It did very well. And then here you have top management letting the firm go to pot, so to speak. And I should say another sort of a spoken will, this decline, is Bob Ritterizer, who comes in to sort of replace and supplement Bob Foman in the 80s. Turns out to be very indecisive, can't make a decision, talks in movie analogies. People have been there their whole lives, see the firm go under by management, and they're very bitter.
More on that in the book, Sudden Death. Mark Stevens, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And still ahead on this morning's business, Money Magazine picks the best cities in America when we continue.
In Funny Money today, $42,000. That's the average salary for a teacher working in Alaska. The Alaskan average rates the highest in the country.
The cost of living is a major factor in deciding where to live, but Tyler Matheson of Money Magazine says quality of life is becoming an even more important factor.
Like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, most of us eventually come to realize that there's no place like home. But indulge your fantasies for a moment. If you had your choice of places to live in the U.S., where would it be? Well, this month, in its third annual survey, Money Magazine rates America's 300 largest metro areas from top to bottom for quality of life. The winner, a place where Dorothy and Toto would have felt right at home, the Emerald City, Seattle, Washington. Now, to give the survey a special validity, Money asked a sample of readers what they prized most about places to live. The top priorities this year were the availability of quality hospitals and doctors. Also ranking high were the likelihood of house price gains, an abundance of affordable homes, lots of recreational opportunities, and a reasonable crime rate. On all these counts except crime, Seattle scored well. There are dozens of theaters and museums, and few places rival Seattle as a haven for outdoors enthusiasts. What's more, the local economy, anchored by Boeing, the aircraft maker, is booming. And believe it or not, Seattle has less annual rainfall than Miami. I'm Tyler Matheson of Money Magazine.
In showbiz news, CBS has landed rights to broadcast the 1994 Winter Olympics from Lillehammer, Norway. That announcement late Wednesday from CBS executives who say the network will pay $300 million for those rights. That's even more than the $243 million the same network is spending for the 1992 Winter Games in Albertville, France.
The strategy is quite clear. We want to be competitive and more competitive, and we'll pay whatever price that's needed.
We consider ourselves the #1 sports network. We will go all out to maintain that position, and no matter what the event is, CBS will be there.
The Olympic investment is considered risky. Average ratings have declined since the 1980 Winter Games in Lake Placid. In today's Outlook, the Federal Reserve Board reports on the M1 measure of money supply for the week ended August 14th. The Commerce Department reports on import and export prices in July. And looking ahead to tomorrow in our Business Focus, a profile of stock newsletter guru Al Frank, editor and publisher of The Prudent Speculator, as our series Smart Money continues on this morning's business. Now let's take one final look at the business headlines. This morning, the big three U.S. automakers reporting higher car sales in mid-August, up 6% at Chrysler, 2.9% at Ford, just a fraction at GM. Former Drexel Burnham assistant trader Lisa Jones gets a 15-month term and a $25,000 fine for lying to a grand jury looking into Drexel's dealings with the now-defunct Princeton Newport securities firm. And the stock market begins the day 27 points higher on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And that's our broadcast for this Thursday, August 24th. I'm Doug Ramsey in New York. For all of us at FNN and This Morning's Business, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
This Morning's Business is brought to you in part by U.S. Sprint, America's first and only nationwide 100% digital fiber optic phone company.